Nobody joins a cult. Nobody joins something they think is going to hurt them. You join a religious organization, you join a political movement, and you join with people that you really like.
I think in everything that I tell you about Jim Jones, there's going to be a paradox. Having this vision to change the world, but having this whole undercurrent of dysfunction that was underneath that vision.
Some people see a great deal of God in my body. They see Christ in me, a hope of glory.
He said, if you see me as your friend, I'll be your friend. As you see me as your father, I'll be your father. He said, if you see me as your God, I'll be your God.
Jim Jones talked about going to the promised land, and then pretty soon we were seeing film footage of Jonestown.
Rice, black-eyed peas, Kool-Aid.
We all wanted to go. I wanted to go.
People's Temple truly had the potential to be something big and powerful and great. And yet, for whatever reason, Jim took the other road.
On the night of the 17th, it was still a vibrant community. I would never have imagined that 24 hours later they would all be dead.
Die with a degree of dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. There's nothing to death, it's just stepping over into another plane. Don't be this way.
Nobody joins a cult. If someone tells you, hey, I'm meeting this small group of spiritual people and we have a really cool host, your reaction will probably be, okay, cool, have fun. But if someone whispers you, I'm in a cult, you are much, much less likely to have the same reaction. But those two things are not essentially different. The definition of the word cult is a small, unestablished, non-mainstream religious group that typically revolves around a single leader. And there are organizations that essentially fit the definition of a cult, but led to very positive social results. The word cult is often used in a denigrating manner, but the definition extends to fan clubs, any and all religions involving a central group or figure, and so on. You wouldn't condemn a group of people dressing up while watching Rocky Horror Picture Show as evil, although they might very much want it to. But you know that it is, without a doubt, a cultish culture. It is the way it is used that makes a cult something bad. And the reason it's used that way is no other than the black sheep of the family, destructive cults, which will be our sole focus of today's presentation. When talking about destructive cults, there's no way around the infamous cult that caused the biggest mass murder or suicide in modern history, Jim Jones and the People's Temple. People's Temple was a religious movement founded in 1955 by Jim Jones in Indianapolis, Indiana. The group moved to California in the 1970s and established several locations throughout the state, including its headquarters in San Francisco. At its peak, the temple boasted 20,000 members in connection with left-wing political figures, including George Moscone, 37th mayor of San Francisco, and Walter Mondale, 42nd vice president of the United States. In the summer of 1977, Jones and several hundred temple members moved to Johnstown, Guyana, to escape building pressure from San Francisco media investigations. The People's Temple is best known for the events of November 18, 1978 in Guyana, when 909 Americans with a total of 918 people died in a mass murder-suicide at its remote settlement, formerly called Jonestown, as well as the murders of Congressman Leo Ryan and members of his visiting delegation in nearby Port Katoma. The mass suicide killings in Jonestown resulted in the greatest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act prior to the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001. Looking back at the grim history of Jim Jones and People's Temple, we can see how this movement perfectly fit in almost every trait of destructive cults. Jim Jones is a charismatic leader. He enforced countless measures in order to govern his utopia. We will take a look at those measures to see how perfectly they fit into the categories of destructive cult's definition. First, charismatic leadership. Although sinister, Jim Jones is a cunning and smart person. He's talented in manipulating people with his silver tongue. Second, deception in recruiting. I decided how I demonstrate my Marxism. The thought was infiltrate a church, so I consciously made a decision to look into that prospect. James Warren Jones. As a Marxist, James Jones lied about the intention of People's Temple on purpose from the very beginning. The deception went deep and thorough. Third, use of thought reform methods. Jonestown has loudspeakers every corner, and they broadcast propaganda programs created by no other person than Jim Jones himself. The content focuses on praising North Korea and criticizing capitalism. The point is, it goes on for 18 hours per day, leaving only 6 hours for people to sleep. Such method would be anything but successful in a normal society, which Jonestown is pretty far from. Next, isolation, physical or psychological. Jim Jones understands that to govern a town with a population of 1,000, violence is never the answer, because his power can be easily overthrown when people unite. If people unite, that is. And he used every method to prevent that from happening. After moving into Jonestown, hundreds of families were torn apart. Jim deployed them into different dormitories and cut connections between them. Deep in the jungle, with no family around, the depression and isolation pushed people's faith to the only person they knew would never fail them, Jim Jones. Next, demand for absolute unquestioning devotion and loyalty. In order to further enforce his domination, Jim encouraged spouses to turn on each other, question each other's loyalty and faith to People's Temple, and requires that all children must address and treat him as their biological father. Next, strict control over members' daily routines. People's Temple required that everyone, regardless of age and gender, needed to work for 11 hours per day with only half-hours break, exploiting the energy for basically everything else while maintaining an error-class schedule. Last but not least, sharp, unsurpassable distinction between us and them. People's Temple also spread rumors around the town. The stories are basically variations of the Saw-Pillar story from the Bible, stating what would happen if someone had doubt or became disloyal. The subject varied, but the message stayed the same. You are going to heaven if you follow, and you will die tragically and go to hell if you don't. With such extreme methods, people were mostly successfully brainwashed. Hence the goal of destructive cult, to subjugate its members' individuality, making them easier to subdue or manipulate. And with a mindless army like that, a cult leader can pretty much do whatever he pleases, be that filling his pocket with Converse money, or conducting violent activities in the name of something greater. And that is where the destructive meets the cult.
In 1969, the Manson family cult murdered 7 people at the behest of leader Charles Manson. In 1978, more than 900 Americans killed themselves under the direction of cult leader James Warren Jim Jones, also known as Jim Jones, leader of the People's Temple. In 1993, the world watched in horror the 51-day Waco siege of a cult compound that led to the deaths of 4 federal agents and 83 cult members. This cult was led by Vernon Howell, known as Koresh, who reportedly sexually abused children of the cult. The question is, how and why did all these people follow those leaders? What could possibly have coerced them into taking these actions? If you click the link above, this will show you a perfect description of the mindset of cult followers, where the leader is everything, and without the leader, everyone will die. In cults, the leader is the salvation, the maker and the final arbiter of justice. When Charles Manson was 6 years old, he was able to talk the girls in his first grade class into beating up the boys that he didn't like. And when the principal asked him why he did that, 6-year-old Charles Manson said, "It wasn't me. They were doing what they wanted. You can't blame me for that." This line that he told the principal was the exact same defense he would use in the Tate LaBianca trial in the late 1960s. Leaders tend to be pathologically narcissistic and lack empathy. They are depending on admiration of others, more so where they overvalue themselves and undervalue others. In addition to being narcissistic, destructive cult leaders are also simultaneously charismatic and authoritarian. This can also be described as being a charming predator, where they charm their way into your good graces, and once they have established their sense and a bond with you, they then assert their dominion over you. Destructive cult leaders also tend to be extremely secretive. They isolate followers from outside influences to maintain control over them. By cutting off cult followers from any family and friends, the leader prevents them from having any sort of doubt cast onto the leader or the cult. Family and friends are the ones that we trust most to give us a reality check on our actions and on our lives. Without these, we are unable to truly and clearly see where we are, which is how destructive cult leaders influence completely and wholly the members of the cult. In addition to the aforementioned traits, destructive cult leaders in particular, are also great sensors. They are able to recognize the emotional presence of others, and they are very adept at targeting specific personalities, particularly people who are generally in a transitional period of their lives and are lost emotionally and psychologically. These people are generally seeking some way to fill the void, either seeking companionship, family, or a greater purpose in their lives, which is what cult leaders recognize and offer them. This is seen in the recruitment, selection, and thought reform processes of typical destructive cults. Members of the cult are programmed to become psychologically and physically dependent on the cult, in particular on the leader of the cult. In addition to being a great censor, destructive cult leaders are also averse to confrontation and conflict. They structure the cult environment to avoid any conflict. And if ever there's a situation where a cult member casts doubt onto the ability of the leaders or questions why things are the way they are, that cult member is quick to be ostracized. Destructive cult leaders are accountable only to his or her personal beliefs. All the laws of the cult are derived from the leader. Anything that the leader says is gold, is the law, is the ultimate law. And whenever someone disobeys or does not follow the rules of the cult, that person is quickly set back on track, either by psychological or by physical means.
We had previously gone over the structure of how destructive cults function and the characteristics of their leadership. Leadership is one of the most important factors in how recruits become converted into the cult, but what further strengthens the leadership's position is their organizational structure. For this section, we'll delve into that organizational structure and how it is built through recruitment and indoctrination. During the recruitment process, studies have found that the most important factor in gathering and growing followers is heightened stress. Research has suggested that cult members are generally recruited during a time in an individual's life where it is particularly stressful, such as a death in the family or a dramatic breakup. Recruiting tends to target in environments where people may be lost and more vulnerable, such as drug-ridden areas or places of poverty. Studies have found that recruits tend to embody some of the following psychological traits: dependency, unassertiveness, gullibility, low tolerance for uncertainty, disillusionment with the status quo, naive idealism, desire for spiritual meaning. What these mean is a dependency is an intense desire to belong, stemming from a lack of confidence. Unassertiveness, a reluctance to say no or question authority. Gullibility, a tendency to believe what someone says without really thinking about it, low tolerance for uncertainty, a need to have any question answered immediately in black and white terms, disillusionment with the status quo, a feeling of marginalization within one's own culture, and a desire to see the culture change. Naive idealism, a blind belief that everyone is good, desire for spiritual meaning, a need to believe that life has a higher purpose. Recruitment takes advantage of these vulnerabilities and tailors themselves to meet the needs of the recruit instead of pushing the ideals of the cult. This leads to lying about the cult's true intentions and preying on the fears and vulnerabilities of their target. The organization will come to a potential recruit and portray itself as mainstream and benign, but turn that all around once they've already been recruited. So once a person has become a recruit, they are not considered a convert until they've truly been indoctrinated into the cult. The goal of indoctrination is to create a complete and unquestionable dependency and make the exiting costs or switching costs as high as possible. To do that, it is important to break down that individual's sense of self.
The circle of judgment never fails to destroy their self-esteem. Then he'll be ours to mold.
Let the judgment begin. I'll get the ball rolling. You're a fat idiot.
Yeah, lose some weight.
Hey man, you're fat. Moron type. Fat too.
Yeah, I guess I could lose a few pounds. And I can be kind of thick sometimes.
You failed at everything you've ever tried.
Whoa, you got my number on that one, buddy. This is a smart group.
And your stink brings tears to my eyes.
No, wait a minute, Mo. Oh, my mistake.
As shown in the previous clip, the goal is to break down a person's sense of self. This is where thought reform methods come into play. These methods are a long and never-ending process that continually reinforces a recruit's dependency on the cult as an organization. For example, Patty Hearst of the Symbionese Liberation Army was locked in a dark room, starved, and bombarded with anti-capitalist political ideology. We previously mentioned thought reform in our introduction, but here we will dive deeper into their methods. These methods include purpose, isolate recruits, deception, induce dependency, and dread. Expanding a little bit on each of these, purpose is all about integrating and socializing and persuading them into the cult. Isolating the recruit is all about severing ties from the family and friends who might voice a contrary opinion on their lifestyle and give them a reality check. Severing these ties ensures that those doubts about the group are never reinforced, so they become self-doubts. Deception is very similar to recruitment. The aim is to alter the individual's consciousness. Induced dependency is asking them to demand an absolute and unquestioned authority. This removes the individual's decision-making by having the leader control every moment of their waking life, which includes deciding what they wear, what they eat, and giving them a strict schedule to every day. Also, in inducing dependency, cults often keep their members weak and confused, which involves malnutrition, and makes sure that they devalue any special talents so that they cannot be distinguished between the other cult members. Most importantly, giving them the sense of dread and full dependency on the leader. The member must believe his or her life will completely fall apart without the leader, and the leader may punish doubt or insubordination with physical or emotional trauma. Once all ties to the outside world have been cut, the member feels that his only family is the group and he has nowhere else to go. The member must behave or else he won't get food, water, social interaction, and protection from the outside world. All of this is built around gaining the leader's favor. Members may believe that only group members are saved, so if he leaves, he will face eternal damnation. Once an individual has been successfully indoctrinated, they become a convert. It is important to note that every aspect of the cult social structure is aimed to fortify the leader's stance and to further empower him and expand his control over his converts.
When it comes to escaping a cult, it can be easy for some while very difficult for others. Some individuals are just less susceptible to mind control techniques, and they've retained enough sense of self to make an informed decision to walk out when they realize that the cult is not for them. However, given the nature of a cult, it can be tremendously difficult for others. Leaving can mean losing everything and completely starting over again. A true convert to a cult may have all aspects of their life and consciousness dictated by the cult. and the cult often put tremendous pressure on them to stay. For instance, in Guyana in 1978, with the Jim Jones cult, they actually armed cult members followed cult members who were planning to leave to the airport and shot them for trying to leave. And that actually incident triggered the mass suicide of over 900 members of the cult. The other thing to consider is that once members are indoctrinated, they can't hear what outsiders have to say, and therefore may even have to take extreme measures in order to get them out of the cult. In order to get out of the cult, sometimes people need to be actually removed from the cult without their own will because they're so brainwashed. And so that involves first kidnapping them to remove them from the cult environment. Once they are removed from that cult environment, though, there needs to be a lot of debriefing to re-educate the cult member on basically thought reform techniques to help them recognize the methods that were used in the cult experience to get them to that level of hypnotism and brainwashing that they experienced. So other methods of debriefing include asking questions that encourage the cult member to think in a critical, independent way and help him or her to recognize the type of thinking and praising them for it. Finally, attempting to produce an emotional connection to the former life by introducing objects from his or her past and having family members share their memories of his or her pre-cult existence can be powerful in getting people deprogrammed from the cult. So, if you even have someone who wants to get out on their own, exit counseling can still be a huge help. Definitely kind of is the same as deprogramming in a lot of ways, just with a more voluntary nature to it. So family and friends, past connections, and a lot of benefits from counseling. And that concludes how to get out.
Hey everyone, I'm Jess, and next I'm going to talk about how theories of leadership play into cult organizations. First and foremost, devout cult followers and followers in business organizations alike have to choose to follow a leader. Although cults may use additional brainwashing to indoctrinate their members, the members have to choose to be there in the first place for those ideas to take hold. Often, followers choose to follow their leader because of the leader's values and their message. Authenticity, as we discussed in class, plays in here too, because the best way for a leader to clarify those values is by being his or her authentic self. We see this at play in many cults, with leaders talking about their personal story to illustrate their values. Then, cult leaders built a community around those shared values. In cults, leaders make it clear that people outside the cult don't share these values, and they're therefore uneducated or evil outsiders for that reason. This establishes that kind of in-group, out-group dynamic that you see a lot. However, strong community is a tool that many organizations can benefit from. It doesn't always signify the existence of a cult. However, critics of certain groups may ascribe cult-like characteristics to organizations with uniquely strong communities with highly devoted members. One community you might have heard of is the CrossFit community. Here's one community member's take on that community and its values.
Contrary to popular belief, CrossFit is not a cult. A little cult-esque, maybe, but definitely not a cult. Cult-ish. Unlike in a cult, in CrossFit, you don't always talk about CrossFit and try and recruit new members. Actually, come to think of it, people in CrossFit only talk about CrossFit. In a cult, you have to give them tons of your money, not in CrossFit. I mean, the memberships are like $200 a month, but that's for like cleaning and stuff. Are we sure it's not a cult? Plus, in a cult, they make you drink Kool-Aid. You don't have to drink anything in CrossFit. I mean, they are always pushing their protein drinks. Shit. I joined a cult, didn't I?
So some of the metrics mentioned here aren't really cult qualifiers. So I'll let you guys think about where CrossFit fits in there. But one characteristic cults often do show is hierarchy. As discussed in class with the Levitt reading, hierarchy satisfies humans' deep need for order and security and gives group members a sense of identity. With hierarchy comes authority as well. We often see cult leaders having a lot of authority, probably more than traditional leaders. That's because their authority often goes unquestioned by their followers. However, the most successful cult leaders are charismatic and engaging with that authority to mask that control. In the next clip from a Vice documentary on a Russian Christian cult, you can see a little bit how the cult leader remains engaging while also clearly establishing his place at the top of the hierarchy.
Finally, it was time for us to get our first glimpse of the teacher himself. Any moment now, Vissarion's going to descend from the stairs and address everyone here. And as you can see, everyone's eagerly anticipating it. I have no doubt in my mind that they believe he is God. And it's interesting and kind of scary to see so many people have so much faith in one man or God. We had traveled thousands of miles to the middle of nowhere in Siberia to see this man, Vissarion, address his congregation on what they call the holiday of good fruits. It was sort of spooky. Vissarion's making his way down now. Very slowly, very Christ-like. And just as Vissarion was about to share some infallible nuggets of wisdom, they made us turn off the camera.
So, with hierarchy comes the requirement for compliance with the rules and values of the organization. Both cults and businesses often have specialization and hierarchies based on members' roles in the organization. If you do well, you move up in the ranks. But if you don't, then there's often a form of punishment. Depending on the cult, punishments can range from alienation and stigma to far more violent things. In businesses, thankfully, we see far less violent punishments. So, what can cults teach us about leadership? Cults are an excellent example of strong values shared among a tight-knit community. Cults also encourage participation, community, and personal growth in followers. Though the ultimate goal of these things may be far more sinister in a cult than in a traditional organization. Cults also seek out agreeable, non-critical thinkers because they're easiest to indoctrinate. This tells us that good business leaders should surround themselves with critical thinkers who challenge them to avoid having a mindless cult-like following. So we want to keep that critical thinking, but we might want followers to leave their egos at home, the way that the cult followers do. Although the cult leader likely has a huge ego, which isn't good for a traditional leader, a follower's lack of ego allows them to commit to their goals and eliminate corporate politics to a greater extent. Not having an ego also limits fears of failure, so followers take more risks to innovate, and that's a good thing. Clearly, destructive cults are toxic environments to be in. But there are some things we can observe and learn from the structures of these cults that can be implemented in healthy organizational environments. I hope this presentation has shed some light on how that can be accomplished. Thanks for watching, guys.